Greetings. This is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with another Asimov story from his early writing years. Watching his writing quality and style slowly coming up from the deep. And he appears once again in Astonishing, although after practically always having his name on the cover, at least for Astonishing, he found its companions, super science stories or novels. And even getting the cover a couple of times. This time, even his name isn't on the cover. The story shown, of course, is one of the other stories, the Mars Tube, S.D. Gotzaman. Well, that's a great name in science fiction. Well, maybe it was once, I don't know. So, at any rate, but once again, he is in the table of contents as the Super-Neutron by Isaac Asimov, page 36, and the little blurb reads, the chief liar of the Ananias Society was a man who told the truth. Well, that's an interesting thought. Okay. There it is. So, a man who told the truth, huh? Now, let's have a little brief introduction to this thing, because this, well, really early, and I do mean really early in his time as a writer, he had the idea of having these two guys that can talk to each other. It makes it easy to express the story in dialogue, So it makes it easy to express the story in dialogue because you got two guys talking to each other, and so you had Turner and Sneed. The idea was there'd be a series. As we all know, that never happened. But it wasn't too much longer before we got another couple of guys, Powell and Donovan, who did go on to become continuing characters in something of a series. They appear in four of the actual robot stories. And I think after that span, they or at least one of them are seen again. So Powell and Donovan are actually a more successful thing. Well, here he does something again that he thinks he'd like to do, and suppose you could have a series of these stories kind of start in the same format and have like this and go like that. And furthermore, the stories involve people just gathering around talking in a room. We see a lot of that in Foundation. We see that at least as far back as his story Homo Sol, where all these galactic Federation, aliens are, 288 of them are gathered around a table trying to decide whether to welcome Earthlings as the 289th, since now the Earthlings have become capable of interstellar travel. So that's but mostly it's just a lot of deliberation. I guess you could construe some of the trends that with all the continuous discussions among Congress and so forth, that lead to the persecution of the guy trying to go to the moon. But on the whole, there's a lot of that. Well, here's kind of the preeminent sort of, this is really going to be talking. This is going to be the same people, more or less. Give or take some guests or people joining or what have you. Joining, leaving, or guests, of course. But pretty much the same group of people meeting regularly. And they do something over dinner. And he had this idea of something called the Honorable Society of Ananias. And they would get together and they would tell lies to each other, and you had to make the lie sound so convincing that there couldn't be anything wrong with it, or you pay for the dinner. Of course, if you do carry it off, I'm not quite sure who's supposed to pay for the dinner. That's not clear, but oh well. Anyway, as we know, there may be other cases where people are meeting like this. I don't know, but all of them would be like one shots if anything like that even exists. He doesn't get anything like that going on successfully until fully 30 years later with his Black Widower series, and then also his Union Club mysteries. So he does finally get to do that, but that's a whole lot later. This was the first abortive attempt at this, and all in all, it goes moderately well, actually. I mean, it could have made for a good series if he made a few more of them, or a bunch of them. But alas, he never even thought of another one to do, and, well, that was the end of that. So, Super-Neutron. Alright. Well, I might as well state right now, I couldn't find any difference, even a typographical error, between what's in the magazine and what gets reprinted, other than, again, the added stuff. You have the content blurb I've already read off. We have another blurb here, which reads, "To join the Ananias Club, one had to do two things: invent a fantastic lie and make it sound like the truth. Gilbert Hayes did the second admirably, but there was some doubt about the first." Okay, and here we get it. The only picture that goes with it is with this cover here, first page. So there they are, they're pointing at the sun, and you can see there's a dark opaque body blocking the sun like it's about to go right into it. Well, dark like a planet, because it absorbs the yellow and red spectra, and apparently has no other discernible physical properties. The thought was that maybe this thing would be like to the sun like a neutron to a uranium atom. And they would illustrate that he would illustrate these things with, well, yeah, most of the neutrons going around through uranium would not collide with any of the nuclei of any of the atoms. But a few would, a small percentage, and that would still be enough, if uncontrolled, for a serious explosion. You could almost see the whole galaxy exploding if these things are some kind of super neutrons hitting stars once in a great while, and the stars, every time they get hit, maybe go supernova. This is written at a time when we had no idea what kind of star even goes supernova or why. It was like one day it's just going along like normal, and the next it just suddenly decided to explode. And and if ever ours did that, everything inside the orbit of Pluto, Pluto as well, would be entirely vaporized. So it's rather an interesting thing, and definitely an intimidating situation. You think, well, okay, that's it. The Mercury just got gobbled up, as the 8 minutes as it comes forward from the sun to the Earth, a little bit later. Oh, there went Venus, 30 seconds now. That's kind of effective. That's kind of a neat moment in there. But how can something be so completely devoid of all other physical properties, including apparently mass, because it has no gravity, it has no inertia, it has really nothing of the kind. Well, there's a few things. If it's that devoid, there's a few things that don't hold up, unfortunately. One is, well, this is not an orbiting planet. It doesn't respond to gravity. These things could be going all through the universe, and maybe like kind of like a rogue planet in a way, which I think no one really knew whether such things exist. Now we seem to have reason to believe they do exist. But rogue planets would still be planets normally. They still have gravity, and if one went through a solar system, it could potentially kind of discombobulate things a bit, even if it didn't hit anything. So, but this thing apparently, these things have no mass, no gravity. They act like they have inertia because they'll just proceed on straight lines. And it seems to me that's like like something that might not even have a physical surface. It's totally transparent in all frequencies except the visible yellow and red. Everything else, heat, ultraviolet, all the other colors, cosmic rays, microwave radiation, everything you can think of just goes right through that thing. A whole planet, mind you. I mean, You can talk about how they illustrate how the guy illustrating this illustrates how glass, well, yeah, it doesn't transmit ultraviolet, but transmits everything else. Yeah, but if you get a big enough, thick enough piece of glass, it won't be. So, I mean, certainly a piece of glass the size of a planet would not be any kind of transparent. So, that's the illustration, well, kind of breaks down as an illustration at least. But hey, who's to say something couldn't magically be perfectly transparent? Well, I am a big good differ also with that one, if it had a real and substantial existence. Indeed, this thing is so utterly undetectable and so utterly anything that, when it's further away, it's this little star dot, and, people, sure, maybe, it's way at the southern region where barely anybody bothers to look much anyway. So it could have been in a million pictures, no one would have noticed. One of the things that pictures for is they'll compare one against the other. They do this dot that, well, that's interesting. There's a dot here, but not here. And this next one has one here, but not here. Another one, oh, it seems to be moving in a specific direction. It will take 3 to establish a direction, and a few more to direct that whatever it is traveling at a consistent pace, which might lead them to say, well, maybe it's in orbit around the sun on some kind of a polar orbit around the sun. An interesting concept, but I don't think we ever meet up with anything like that. Yes, but I don't think that. I think if anything like that exists, we probably know about it by now, but you never know. At any rate, this is 1941, and this is it's 1941 now. We are now in 1941, and that's not really a known thing. The skies are rather minimally looked at in those days. And then I guess once it gets really close to the sun, it gets lost in the glare of the sun. It's like trying to see Mercury in daytime. You're not going to see that. But maybe there'd be some span where it's close enough to be a planet, visible with a visible disk, as they say, but not so close that it's close to the sun and becomes invisible. Well, there could be such a span, and nobody saw it. Okay, those are practical unrealities to it. Alright. But see, the other thing is, if it is so devoid of mass or inertia, I think at one point there is a statement that it does have mass, inertia, momentum, which doesn't really make sense. Because again, it has those things and it has substance. If it has substance, it's going to have gravity. It's going to have gravity. It's going to, have gravitation be affected by and affecting on gravity. Which leads to one other thing. He does something once again that, if you recall, in the previous Astonishing story, he had to include a little letter describing what exactly it did. This little solution that Alan had, the city guy, for trying to pull the tractor out of the truck out of the mud. And once again, in Viewpoints, Isaac Asimov has written a letter to Astonishing readers. This one reads challenge. So let's just take a look at this. It's kind of interesting. So, okay, dear Mr. Pohl, it looks like I'm beginning to write a letter for every story I sell. Well, at least 2 for sure. I'm beginning to think I should check for others. It's a bad habit. It's like adding insult to injury. First, I ask the reader to sit through a story, and then I ask him to sit through a letter as dessert. It's things like this which will lead someday to a bloody revolt. The public can stand just so much. Still, I have something to say about Super-Neutron, and I insist on saying it. It has been said by others, though I will not vouch for the truth of the saying, that no science fiction story has ever been written without some flaw in science, big or little. The only exceptions are those yarns which don't include any science. In this story, I'm referring to Super-Neutron. I wonder, we have one without any science violations. There's at least his well-known A Whiff of Death, where all the science is literally and actually true, and furthermore was current at a time in the past where science is known. So there's nothing on it's unscientific. in there, and you probably got at least a couple other stories that are kind of similar. Just in Death comes to mind. All right, but those don't get called science fiction. Even they kind of are. In this story, I'm referring to Super-Neutron. I packed all the science I could, being careful to include no fallacy, misstatement, or error. Actually, there is one, and I'll get to that. It was not easy, but I ended up with something which I think is foolproof. In fact, I'll go as far as to dare any reader to poke a hole in any statement made in the story, which is a thoroughly fantastic one, so I'm really going out on a nice, breezy, exposed limb. This holds for the scientific angles of the yarn. The logic in it is rather weaker. What do you expect from a magazine fiction, Aristotle? But it will hold up. I have had to make several assumptions, but not one of them is in contradiction to any known scientific fact. All right, known scientific fact. We'll settle for that. And almost all the reasoning is strictly accurate. The reader is invited to attack reasoning and assumptions also if he wants. I'll take him up on it. I wish you were around still to do that. There is one sophistry in the story. I covered it up as well as I could, but it's there. Never mind where. Find it yourself. Isaac Asimov, 174 Windsor Place, Brooklyn, New York. How can they put his home address in there? You know, you read the story and I know where that person lives. You can go see him. Hey, I read this story of yours in the magazine, and I really didn't like it. Intimidating person in the middle of the night bangs on his door. I don't know. Probably not the greatest thing. So, basic story is they gather around and tell lies. A new guest, who I guess goes from being mere guest to president of the society, tells the story. Well, I was in space doing some cosmic ray observation, blah blah blah, and then I saw this thing, and I studied it, and it's headed directly for the sun, and its properties are very bizarre and strange as he describes, but it's headed right for the sun, and it's sure to cause the sun to explode. And, apparently they're able to look into the sky and see it. The picture, let's go back to the picture for a moment, because the picture has this thing, about to hit the sun. Let's examine that thing very closely. It's almost up to the level of the sun as people are watching, but it was coming from directly the southern antipodes of the solar system. So maybe you would have seen it coming to the lower portions. Let's say it's kind of a little bit on our side of it rather than the other side. Personally, I suspect that anything like that had come along and been so devoid of any effect, I shouldn't be surprised that the same thing, whatever it is, comes out the other side of the sun, unaffected and unaffecting. It's just one step away from the classic, invisible teacup in orbit around the sun kind of scenario. You can't see it; it has no effect. What makes you think it's actually there, or versus if it's not? And this was accepted that you could see something in the yellow and red frequencies is, in all other respects, that invisible teacup. So that would be my weakness. But it is kind of neat. He talks about uranium fission products. He talks about using power for uranium. He even talks about using cadmium. He says, well, maybe the sun didn't explode because it's not like uranium. We got lucky, humanity. It was but rather like cadmium that could just ignore all of these neutrons and and not do anything. It's just absorb it. I don't know. Just cadmium changed to another isotope when it does that. I have to admit I'm not totally up on my nuclear physics. I do, however, know one other thing. He admits to this one where he talks about how if something breaks up, that like let's say you're going to use the bombarded. Yes, here it is. Bombarded uranium nucleus, and he has it that it would split up into masurium, barium, gamma rays, and more neutrons, thus establishing a cyclic process. Well, masurium, of course, was supposed to be element number 43. It had been supposedly found and later realized to be a mistake. And so the name couldn't be given that way. Later on, it was found that it could only be made synthetically, and hence has acquired the name technetium. Okay, but let's look at what else you get. When you split uranium, you do get barium, but mesurium, as it would be, or technetium, is not among the principal decay products of fissioning uranium. Krypton would be that. No, xenon. Sorry, that same. Thinking krypton, xenon instead of the noble gas. Xenon would be along with barium, so barium at least is correct, and along with the your gamma rays and more neutrons. That part's all correct. But like I said, technetium or mesurium is not among one of the main decay products. Xenon is, along with iodine, cesium, strontium, and I think one other. But at any rate, it would, but that's not listed among the principal products, if indeed it comes out at all. So that's another group. But again, we're talking about the limits of what science knew. So anyway, so that's kind of a neat story, but and in a way, it's kind of a shame that no others appeared in that series. But there it is. Thank you for listening.